August 4th, 1962, 10:30 p.m. Marilyn Monroe's hand trembled as she dialed the phone. Frank Sinatra answered on the second ring. Hours later, Marilyn was dead, and Frank never spoke about that call. The phone rang in Frank Sinatra's Palm Springs compound. He was hosting a small party, nothing extravagant, just a few close friends, some drinks, some music playing low in the background. Frank was standing near the bar, a glass of Jack Daniels in his hand, laughing at something Dean Martin had just said. Then the phone rang, the private line, the number only a handful of people knew. Frank's housekeeper answered. She listened for a moment, then looked across the room at Frank. Her face changed. Something in her expression made Frank set down his drink and walk over. "Who is it?" "It's Miss Monroe, Mr. Sinatra. She says it's urgent." Frank took the phone. "Marilyn?" Her voice was slurred, barely coherent. "Pills." Frank knew immediately. She'd been taking pills for years, sleeping pills, anxiety medication, painkillers. Sometimes she mixed them with alcohol, and when she did, she became someone else entirely. Fragile, desperate, lost. "Frank, I need to talk to you." "Marilyn, where are you? Are you alone?" "I'm home. Brentwood. Frank, I don't know what to do anymore. I can't keep doing this." Frank stepped away from the party, moving into his study, closing the door. "Marilyn, have you been drinking? Have you taken pills?" "Just a few. I couldn't sleep. I haven't slept in days, Frank. Every time I close my eyes, I see them. I see him. And I know they're going to get rid of me. They're going to make me disappear." "Who's going to get rid of you, Marilyn?" "You know who. The Kennedys. Bobby. They used me, Frank. They used me, and now they're throwing me away like I'm nothing. Like I'm garbage." Frank's jaw tightened. He knew about Marilyn's relationships with both John F. Kennedy and his brother Robert. Everyone in certain circles knew. It was Hollywood's worst-kept secret. Marilyn had been involved with JFK during his campaign and early presidency, and then, when that relationship cooled, she'd gotten involved with Bobby Kennedy. But recently something had changed. The Kennedys had cut her off completely. No more phone calls, no more secret meetings, no more promises. They decided Marilyn was too dangerous, too unstable, too much of a liability, and they dropped her without explanation, without closure, without any concern for what it would do to her. "Marilyn, listen to me. You need to be careful what you say. Phones can be tapped. People listen." "I don't care anymore, Frank. Let them listen. Let them hear everything. I know things. I know things that would destroy them. And maybe I should tell someone. Maybe I should go to the press and tell them everything." "Marilyn, don't. Don't do that. You don't understand what you're dealing with. These aren't people you threaten. These are the most powerful people in
the country. They're cowards, Frank. They're cowards who use people and throw them away, just like they did to you. Remember? Remember when Jack was supposed to stay at your house? You built a helipad for him. You renovated everything, and then they canceled. They humiliated you because they decided you were too connected to the mob. They used you to win the election, and then they threw you away just like they're throwing me away." Frank closed his eyes. She was right. The Kennedys had used him, and they had thrown him away, and it still hurt, even months later. But that didn't mean Marilyn should go to war with them. That didn't mean she should try to expose them, because people who tried to expose the Kennedys tended to have very short lifespans. "Marilyn, I know you're hurt. I know you're angry, but going to the press won't help you. It'll only make things worse." "What could be worse than this, Frank? What could be worse than feeling like you don't matter? Like your life doesn't matter? Like you're just a thing for powerful men to use and discard?" Her voice broke. She was crying now, full sobs that made it hard to understand what she was saying. Frank felt a weight settle in his chest. He'd known Marilyn for years. They'd been friends, sometimes more than friends, though never seriously. Frank cared about her. He genuinely cared about her, and he could hear in her voice that she was at the edge of something dark and final. "Marilyn, where are your friends? Where's Pat? Where's Peter?" Pat and Peter Lawford were mutual friends who often looked after Marilyn. "Peter won't talk to me. The Kennedys told him not to. They told everyone not to talk to me. I'm poison now, Frank. I'm toxic. Nobody wants to be near me because they're all afraid of what the Kennedys might do. I'm not afraid of the Kennedys, Marilyn. I'm talking to you right now. You're the only one, Frank. You're the only one who still treats me like a person. Listen to me. I want you to do something. I want you to put down the pills. I want you to drink some water, and I want you to call your doctor. Tell him you need help tonight. Can you do that? I don't want a doctor, Frank. Doctors just give me more pills. I need someone to tell me it's going to be okay. I need someone to tell me my life isn't over, that I'm not used up, that I still matter. You matter, Marilyn. You matter to me. You matter to millions of people who love you and your movies and everything you've given to the world. But I don't matter to them, the Kennedys, and they're the only ones I wanted to matter to. Isn't that pathetic? I'm Marilyn Monroe. I'm the most famous woman in the world, and all I wanted was for two men who treated me like a secret to actually love me, and they never did. They never will. Frank didn't know what to say to that, because she was right. The Kennedys had never loved her. They'd used her for sex, for the thrill of being with a movie star, for the validation to it. Gave their egos. But love? No, they'd never loved her, and Marilyn knew it, and it was destroying her. They talked for another 20 minutes. Frank tried to keep her calm, tried to get her to promise she'd call a doctor, tried to convince her that tomorrow would be better, but he could hear in her voice that she didn't believe him. She'd given up, not just on the Kennedys, on everything. Finally, Marilyn said she needed to go. Her voice was getting quieter, more distant. The pills were taking effect. Thank you, Frank. Thank you for being kind to me, for treating me like I'm real. You are real, Marilyn. You're the most real person I know. No, I'm not. I'm a fantasy. I'm a creation. Marilyn Monroe isn't real. She's just something men invented to project their fantasies onto. And when the fantasy stops working, when I get too old or too difficult or too damaged, then I stop being useful, and then I stop existing. Marilyn, I have to go, Frank. I'm so tired. I just want to sleep. Promise me you'll call your doctor. I promise. But her voice was flat, emotionless. Frank knew she was lying. He knew she wasn't going to call anyone. He knew she was going to take more pills and go to sleep and hope she didn't wake up. Marilyn, wait! The line went dead. Frank stood there holding the phone, his heart pounding. He should call someone. He should call the police, or her doctor, or Peter Lawford, or someone who could get to her house and make sure she was okay. But who would he call? The police would leak it to the press. Her doctor was probably asleep. Peter had been told to stay away from her. And if Frank called the Kennedys, if he called Bobby Kennedy and said Marilyn was in trouble, what would they do? Would they help her? Or would they see it as an opportunity to solve a problem permanently? Frank made a decision he would regret for the rest of his life. He hung up the phone and told himself Marilyn would be fine. She'd taken pills before and survived. She'd threatened suicide before and didn't follow through. She was dramatic, emotional, unstable, but she wouldn't actually do it. She was too smart for that, too strong for that. Frank went back to his party. He smiled, he laughed, he drank, and he tried not to think about the desperation in Marilyn Monroe's voice. The next morning, August 5th, 1962, Frank woke up to his housekeeper knocking urgently on his bedroom door. Mr. Sinatra, you need to come downstairs. It's on the news. Miss Monroe, she's dead. Frank's blood went cold. He rushed downstairs, turned on the television. The newscaster's voice was somber, professional. Marilyn Monroe, the legendary Hollywood actress, was found dead this morning at her home in Brentwood. She was 36 years old. Preliminary reports suggest suicide by barbiturate overdose. An investigation is ongoing. Frank sat down heavily on the couch. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. And he'd known. Last night on the phone, he'd known she was going to do
it, and he hadn't stopped her. He'd gone back to his party and let her die alone. The guilt hit him like a physical blow. He should have called someone. He should have driven to her house himself. He should have done something instead of nothing. But he'd been tired of Marilyn's drama, tired of her late-night calls, tired of playing therapist to a woman who refused to help herself. And now she was dead, and he was partly responsible. Dean Martin called within an hour. Frank, did you hear? I heard. Are you okay? I know you two were close. She called me last night, Dean, hours before she died. She called me and I talked to her and then I let her go. I let her hang up and I didn't call anyone to help her. Frank, you didn't know. I did know, Dean. I knew exactly what she was going to do, and I did nothing. The funeral was held on August 8th, 1962 at Westwood Village Memorial Park Cemetery. It was a small service. Only about 30 people attended. The studio wanted a big public funeral, but Joe DiMaggio, Marilyn's ex-husband who still loved her, refused. He kept it private, intimate, for the people who actually cared about her. Frank was there, sitting in the front row. He wore dark sunglasses, not because of the California sun, but because he didn't want anyone to see his eyes. He didn't cry. Frank Sinatra didn't cry in public, but behind those sunglasses his eyes were red and his jaw was clenched so tight it ached. The service was brief. A few words from a minister who hadn't really known Marilyn, some flowers, some silence, and then it was over. Marilyn Monroe, the
the woman who'd captivated millions, was buried with barely a ceremony. It felt wrong. It felt cruel. But it also felt appropriate, because Marilyn had always been alone, even when surrounded by people. Alone in her fears, her insecurities, her desperate need to be loved. And she died alone, in her bedroom, with a phone by her side and no one to call. After the funeral, Joe DiMaggio pulled Frank aside. "Did she call you that last night?" Frank hesitated, then nodded. "Yes." "What did she say?" "She said she was tired, that she couldn't keep going, that the Kennedys had abandoned her." Joe's face darkened. "Those bastards killed her. Not directly, but they killed her. They used her up and threw her away, and she couldn't handle it. And now they're going to get away with it because nobody has the guts to say what really happened." "What really happened, Joe?" "You know what happened, Frank. She knew too much. She was threatening to talk, and powerful men don't let beautiful women destroy them. One way or another, they make sure those women stay quiet." Frank wanted to argue. He wanted to say that Marilyn's death was suicide, that it was her choice, that the Kennedys weren't involved, but he couldn't, because Joe was right. Even if they hadn't directly killed her, they'd created the circumstances that made her want to die. They'd used her, discarded her, isolated her, and driven
her to despair. And then they'd walked away clean, while she paid the ultimate price. In the days and weeks following Marilyn's death, conspiracy theories began to emerge. People whispered that it wasn't suicide at all, that she'd been murdered to keep her quiet about her affairs with the Kennedys. The coroner's report said barbiturate overdose, suicide, but there were inconsistencies. The lack of pill residue in her stomach, the strange timeline of who found her when, the phone records that mysteriously disappeared. And Frank knew something that most people didn't. He knew about that final phone call. He knew Marilyn had reached out for help, and he knew he hadn't given it to her. The FBI came to interview Frank 3 weeks after Marilyn's death. They were investigating whether there was any truth to the rumors about Kennedy involvement. They wanted to know if Frank had information about Marilyn's relationships with JFK and Bobby Kennedy. Frank told them the truth. "I knew she was involved with them. Everyone knew. But I don't know anything about her death beyond what was reported." "Did she contact you before she died, Mr. Sinatra?" Frank paused. He could tell them about the phone call. He could tell them how desperate she'd sounded, how she'd talked about the Kennedys throwing her away, how she'd threatened to go to the press. He could give them ammunition to investigate further, to potentially expose the Kennedys' treatment of Marilyn. But he didn't. "No," he lied. "I hadn't spoken to Marilyn in weeks before her death." Why did he lie? Partly to protect himself. If it came out that Marilyn had called him hours before her death and he'd done nothing, it would make him look negligent at best, complicit at worst. But mostly, he lied because he knew it wouldn't bring Marilyn back. It wouldn't undo what the Kennedys had done to her, or what she'd done to herself. It would just create more chaos, more pain, more scandal. And Marilyn deserved better than to have her death turned into a political circus. The years passed. Frank continued his career. He sang, he performed, he made movies, but Marilyn's death haunted him. Whenever he performed at venues she'd once graced, whenever he saw her movies on television, whenever August 5th came around on the calendar, he thought about that phone call, about her voice, about her desperation, about his failure to save her. In 1975, Frank was being interviewed for a television special about his career. The interviewer, feeling bold, asked about Marilyn Monroe. "You were friends with her, weren't you? What was she like?" Frank's face went carefully neutral. "Marilyn was a lovely person, talented, troubled. The world wasn't kind to her. There have been persistent rumors about her death. Do you think it was really suicide? I think Marilyn was in a lot of pain, and I think the people who should have protected her failed to do so. Whether she took her own life or whether something else happened, the result is the same. A beautiful, talented woman died far too young because the world used her up and threw her away. Did she ever reach out to you for help?" Frank looked directly at the camera. For a moment it seemed like he might tell the truth, but then he said, "I wish she had. Maybe things would have been different." It was the closest he ever came to publicly acknowledging that final phone call. In 1982, the Los Angeles District Attorney reopened the investigation into Marilyn's death. New evidence had emerged, or rather, old evidence had been reassessed. The timeline didn't make sense. The autopsy had inconsistencies, and there were persistent rumors that Marilyn had been murdered, possibly by people connected to the Kennedys who wanted to silence her before she could reveal her affairs. Frank was called to give a statement. By this time, he was in his 60s, older, wearier, less concerned with protecting powerful people who'd never protected him. The investigator asked him directly, "Mr. Sinatra, did Marilyn Monroe
Monroe contact you on the night of her death?" Frank sat in silence for a long moment. Then he said, "Yes, she called me around 10:30 p.m. We talked for about 20 minutes. What did you discuss?" "She was upset. She'd been taking pills. She was depressed about her relationships ending, about feeling used and abandoned. She talked about the Kennedys, about how they'd treated her." "Did she mention any specific threats to her life?" "No, she talked about exposing them, about going to the press, but she didn't say anyone had threatened her." "Did she sound suicidal?" Frank closed his eyes. "Yes, she sounded like someone who'd given up." "What did you do after the call ended?" "Nothing. I did nothing. I told myself she'd be fine, that she'd sleep it off and call me in the morning apologizing for worrying me. I was wrong." "Why didn't you call someone to check on her?" "Because I was tired. Tired of her drama. Tired of being the person everyone called when they needed saving. And I genuinely thought, that she wouldn't actually do it. I thought she was too strong, too smart. I was wrong about that too." The investigator looked at him with something like sympathy. "Mr. Sinatra, based on everything you've told us, do you believe Marilyn Monroe committed suicide?" Frank thought about it, really thought about it. "I don't know. I know she was in the mental state to do it. I know she had the means. I know she'd attempted it before. But I also know that powerful people wanted her silenced. And I know that sometimes when powerful people want someone silenced, that person ends up dead. Whether Marilyn killed herself or whether someone helped her along, I can't say. But I know this, the Kennedys are as responsible for her death as anyone. They created the circumstances that made her want to die, and that's close enough to murder in my book." The reinvestigation concluded, like the original investigation, that Marilyn's death was probable
Suicide. No charges were filed. No one was held accountable. And Frank went back to his life, carrying the guilt of that phone call for the rest of his days. In his final years, Frank became more open about his regrets. In a conversation with his daughter Nancy in 1997, he brought up Marilyn unprompted. "I should have saved her, Nancy. She called me and asked for help, and I let her down. Dad, you couldn't have known what would happen." "I did know. That's the thing. I knew, and I chose not to act. I chose my own comfort over her life, and I've had to live with that for 35 years. Do you think it would have made a difference if you'd called someone? Maybe, maybe not, but at least I would have tried. At least I wouldn't have let her die alone without even attempting to help her. That's what haunts me, Nancy. Not that I couldn't save her, but that I didn't even try." Frank Sinatra died on May 14th, 1998, 36 years after Marilyn Monroe, almost to the day. And when the obituaries were written, they mentioned his music, his movies, his legendary career. But they didn't mention the phone call. They didn't mention his guilt. They didn't mention the secret he'd carried for decades about Marilyn Monroe's final hours. Only a handful of people knew the truth, that on August 4th, 1962, at 10:30 p.m., Marilyn Monroe had reached out for help, that Frank Sinatra had answered, that they'd talked for 20 minutes, that he'd heard the desperation in her voice and done nothing, that hours later, she was dead. And Frank never spoke about it publicly, not because he was protecting the Kennedys, and not because he was afraid, but because speaking about it meant confronting his own failure, his own guilt, his own very human moment of selfishness that had contributed to one of Hollywood's greatest tragedies. August 4th, 1962, 10:30 p.m. Marilyn Monroe's hand trembled as she dialed the phone. Frank Sinatra answered on the second ring. They talked. He tried to help. She hung up. Hours later, she was dead. And Frank Sinatra spent the remaining 36 years of his life wondering if he could have changed that ending, wondering if one more phone call, one more effort, one more moment of caring instead of fatigue might have saved Marilyn Monroe's life. The answer died with him, but the question remains, a question that defines the tragedy of Marilyn Monroe's death and Frank Sinatra's guilt. What if he'd tried harder? What if he'd called someone? What if he'd driven to her house himself? What if? The two most haunting words in the English language, and the two words that followed Frank Sinatra to his grave.